Yes, it says meeting is now streaming live on YouTube. Great.
Awesome. Yeah, we are live. Hi,
Fantastic.
everyone. I'm really
Hey,
excited to
guys.
host Vamsi Krishna Vemuri. He's co-founder of Futurely, global platform for architects and designers to learn more about softwares and cutting-edge technology in AEC. I got to know about Vamsi back in 2020, related to one of his workshops at Design Morphine, and I was curious. Like, this looked really cool. Can you elaborate on this? Can you? I'm interested to know what are the tools and techniques. And I started following his work from that point onwards, and from 2020 to 2021, like there's a lot of life updates in Vamsi's life. He started Futurely from with Eric. So thanks a lot, Vamshi, to be on the show. I'm very excited for this.
Thanks a lot for having me, Mayur. I'm super excited as well.
Yeah. And
Nice.
like one thing, like somehow inherently feel proud seeing you from India pushing the technology in AC, because it's rare to find people from India. So curious to know, like, what were some pivotal moments in your career which got you into experimenting with technology?
Right. I think, like everybody else, I also took the conventional path for a little while. I graduated in 2013 from SRM University in Chennai. And then I worked for a couple of years. It's roughly 2 to 3 years. And somehow I've been lucky and fortunate to have had a really steady and positive growth curve in the professional side of AEC. And then over time, I realized that I'm hitting a standstill. I felt that there's a lot more that could be explored. And given the political and financial and so many constraints that we have in the profession in India, I realized that it's going to take a long time, and my life is going to become so repetitive if I stick to the line of work that I was doing. And that's when I decided to pursue my master's in Städelschule architecture class in Germany. Unfortunately, the school closed down due to some various reasons this year. But nevertheless, yeah, that's when I made a move from India to Germany. Now, one of the most interesting things about the school was the fact that it's not like a highly structured curriculum. It was a really loose-ended program with opportunity for you to develop, pursue your own research. And that's where I think I found my fascination. That was kind of the thing. In fact, that was the initial driver for me to join architecture, which was gaming, media, and animation. And then eventually I traced back all of that when I was doing my master's. And the fact that I could pursue more in that direction, research more in that direction, opened up a whole lot of opportunities. And from there on, I got to network with a lot of international experts, international tutors. I was in the circle of conducting workshops and events, traveling around the world for a while. It was a fun ride until 2020. Everything changed dramatically, and we decided to kickstart Futurely and take it all online. So I was familiar with the educational circles and the networks that operate within the space. So we kind of understood the nuances of how things are and how things are going to be. And thankfully, due to the pandemic and the whole behavioral change for architects and designers to adapt to online learning made it possible for us to scale and connect with different experts from all around the world and kickstart Futurely. And that's how we got started. Yeah.
That's great. And when you were in Germany, or like at the time when you were experimenting with new technology, was there a point where you felt like a bit overwhelmed and like looking at your peers and surrounding, oh, they are doing so many cool things?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think there was this point. I think it immediately happened when I came to Germany, because everyone comes from different walks of life and with their own niche and expertise that they've developed over the years. And when I see and when I was bombarded with so much exciting content and exciting research that's happening all around the world and all around me as well, I think that opened up so many different things. And right now, with the level of connectivity, we cannot just compare or just look at our immediate peers. The whole world is open through Instagram or social media canvas. So you really know what some guy at some different part of the world is doing. And sometimes it could be overwhelming. Sometimes it could be motivating as well. I went through both the phases and now I've come to terms with it.
I
Yeah.
see. And
Yes.
one thing I would like to admit that the tutors you have on Futurely and the type of content in the workshop you conduct is quite interesting and helpful. Like I could foresee like how definitely people can use it in their design or professional workflow. So can you elaborate what are some like things Futurely is aiming to solve through its educational platform, which is not typically found in conventional curriculum?
Right. So one of the fundamental problems that we try to solve is the fact of accessibility, because most often the kind of courses, the kind of techniques that we deal with, these are only accessible for students when they get to their masters or pursue their further research, and which often means that they have to go through the regular grind, the conventional model of education, and then they are exposed to these things. So what we are attempting to do is to reach out to different parts of the world as much as we can and as globally as possible, and be able to give them these kind of ideas, these kind of freshness in whichever stage they are in their architectural or design career, and then open up the possibilities. So that's one thing we do. And the second thing is we're also trying to see how we can plug in to different educational institutions as an accelerator, as a catalyst to kind of speed up the process of this digital and technological transformation. So in short, if I have to say, we try to bridge the gap between the cutting edge or the newness or the technological advancements that's happening around the world to the traditional and conventional architectural schools. That's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, we need those bridges to channel the flow of energy of young architects to experiment with this technology.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think this might be a good segue to go deeper into like your presentation of what are the different softwares and tools and your thoughts.
For sure, for sure. And so just to give everyone a bit of a background, so Mayur and I have been discussing for a couple of days about this talk. And so what we decided to do is run through some of the software that we use as a part of Futurely and as a part of my own research, and some specific tools that I have identified during the course of my hunt for different tools, and something which you can adapt in your architectural AEC practice and also the academic side of work as well. So that's what we're going to look at. And I'm going to fire up my presentation. Just give me a second, please. Share screen. Just a moment.
No problem.
Yeah. I hope the slides visible. Okay, perfect.
Yep, perfect.
Yeah. Do you see my panel of controls?
I just see a full screen with like the title slide.
Okay, perfect. So exploring interdisciplinary mediums for design expression. The title has been given by Mayur. Yeah. So let me move forward. So just to give you a background, a bit of background of my own research interests. In general, I am more inclinated towards a mixed media based approaches. So which include virtual, augmented, and mixed reality based paradigms within the domain of architecture. And as a professional, I am more focused on speculative architectural design, and which means I use design as a tool. I use architecture as a tool to ask or raise questions. Questions about the future, questions about technology, questions about different conditions that a specific piece of technology or a specific piece of framework will put you in. Well, we will discuss, or I mean, we will get into more detail when I go through the presentation. And some of the interesting buzzwords that you might hear from me during the course of this presentation are architecture, gamification, virtual spaces, and virtual economies. I think I will not be touching upon the economies part a lot, but we have a lot of ground to cover. And one of the interesting things that we will take a short dive into is to look at a lot of alternative 3D modeling software that is potentially usable in the AEC sphere. These are some software that most people don't dive into because you know the usual suspects and you are more familiar with them. But then to unlock different creative potential, there's much more to explore through the software that I'm going to show. And to begin with, I'm going to show a short footage of Houdini. Houdini is a generative and procedural software, which is primarily used in the VFX industry. And what I have here is a footage of my colleague Moomin from Futurely, who is an expert at Houdini. And this is kind of the basic interface. So you have the viewport on the left, and then you have your visual scripting space in the right. So it's a bit similar to Rhino and Grasshopper, if I have to say as an analogy. But then what's really interesting is that since it's a visual effects tool package, it has custom-built snippets or custom-built libraries that enable you to explore and see real-time feedback on simulations such as smoke, particle effects. And in this case, what you're looking at on the screen is actually a tornado simulation. And Moomin here actually takes a tornado simulation and then makes it into an architectural project. So that's exactly what's happening here. And here he takes a basic simulation and adds different levels of parameters. And then he bends the smoke or bends the wind paths using different parameters and a bit of Vex scripting. That's the native scripting language of Houdini. And then he comes up with an iteration, as you see here. So this is just a fast forwarded snippet of how it works. And what's really interesting is, as a platform, this is one of the most powerful generative and procedural tools that's available out there for anybody to pick up. And usually it takes a bit of a learning curve to dive into Houdini versus Rhino and Grasshopper, because in Rhino and GH, they are optimized for architects and designers. And some of these node-based definitions, the nodes, you know the names, you understand how things work. But whereas here, the terminology and the syntax slightly changes, and you have containers, you work with code blocks, one inside the other, and so on. So in such cases, getting familiarity with how the VFX series of tools are, and then understanding how you can apply them in an architectural scenario and gaining control is a bit of a trick path. And then that's where you learn through some level of expertise. So this is really an interesting and a powerful tool that we often use at Futurely. And something that unlocks a lot of potential. And what's fantastic is the ability to handle 20 to 30 million poly count, like as if it's a breeze. And then you also have potential to optimize and reduce the poly count within seconds. And it's simply a matter of connecting some visual nodes and you get the feedback. Yeah.
I think like Houdini is like quite underrated tool in architecture, especially like when I was tinkering with it. Like you could do like GPU based like simulation, even like for all the simulation, you can cache it in your memory. So every time you do like different simulation, you don't need to recompute. Whereas every time in like Grasshopper, you could do it, but many times we move the slider, it again recompute it. So you could save a lot of time.
Absolutely, absolutely. Although the Grasshopper has its own perks in terms of the precision and the level of control that we get, it might take a little more time to get that level of grip and control in Houdini, because oftentimes from what I heard from women is that it's so easy to land an amazing result in Houdini. It's so hard to get a result which is so focused and so oriented to what you want. Yeah.
A lot of like this animations I have seen, like especially the Houdini like 19 show release out, and it's creating like a film level animations with all those rendering. And I'm just imagining like if we are creating those like virtual walkthroughs and like metaverses, like this is a great tool. Yeah.
Definitely, definitely. And I think talking about the metaverse or the virtual spaces, you don't want static elements. You don't want just dumb geometries that are there. You want these effects in real time. And that's when this is really powerful if you bridge it with a game engine like Unreal or Unity, for sure.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I'll move on a little forward. Then this is a glimpse of Zbrush. This is one of my favorite tools, and it's something that I extensively use as a part of my arsenal. And what you see here is a super basic animation. But before that, I will just give you a brief outlook of how the UI works. So one of the most interesting and the craziest things about ZBrush is it's a scaleless tool. As in, you don't have precise dimensions, and the whole software works with a unit called pixels, which is their own proprietary tech. And what it does is it calculates and it scales based on that. And your whole interface is only one singular screen that you see. You don't have multiple viewports like different software. And what it lets you is you have a piece of digital clay, which is most often like a sphere or a cube. And you use that as a start point, and then you start manipulating that geometry, and then you eventually achieve a lot of results. But what's so exclusive or interesting here is it's not just what you visualize will not necessarily be the outcome, because there are multiple tools which lets you manipulate, deform, and even create so many instances. Or in this case, let me just do this quick run through. You will notice that just within a matter of minutes, you can get a level of complexity, get a level of intrigue that which you cannot necessarily do in another software. So this is something that got created in a matter of 15 to 20 minutes. And what's the biggest challenge here is that, again, like Houdini, this comes from a space of cinema, VFX, or gaming industry. And most of the tools that are mentioned here, they're all based on the sculpting terminology. Like, for example, the basic point of accessing a menu is called lightbox, which is so ridiculous for someone who comes from an AEC background, because you have no idea how what means what. And ZBrush, to be honest, is one of the most counterintuitive software. This is not a software which you can pick up and click some buttons and you can never understand it in the first go. So it's a matter of exploitation. It's a matter of an innovative alternate approach through which you can repurpose the software for architecture. And what's really fascinating here is this is one of the most comprehensive package for mesh-based applications. Since most of these other industries deal with mesh-based geometries, they really have the maximum toolkit for mesh optimization, mesh-based trimming, slicing, cutting, or if you want to make a mesh ready for 3D printing, this is definitely a place to go to because it can really give you the kind of results that you want. And they also have some interesting attributes to it, not just the sculpting side of it. They have something called the shadow box, for instance. I don't have a video snippet here. So what happens is you have an XYZ, 3 planes. And what it does is it basically projects from all these 3 planes, and using the intersections, you create a new geometry. I can quickly fire up a sample to show you guys. Let me stop this share for a second. I think I will have to get back my floating controls in Zoom.
I really appreciate you are doing like a live, trying a live demo during a live stream.
Yeah. I will, I think, show the output of the shadow box a little later once we go through the presentation. Okay.
So do you envision ZBrush to be played as a conceptual level tool where we are exploring with geometry? Because like one impression I had before, I haven't used ZBrush, but it has a really good visualization and rendering engine too. So
actually not. ZBrush has more like a screen preview render. It's not the best. It gives you these nice, good-looking preview renders, but then, yeah, it's not like a comprehensive render engine. But you may say that on a general level, you can use it for conceptual modeling purposes, ZBrush. But if you, again, gain some control, you can use it for really intricate architectural work as well. But personally, I see the potential of ZBrush more in virtual applications like constructing VR environments or AR geometries, more rather than something buildable, because it comes with this constraint of not having this precise scale and measurement units, which makes it a bit tricky. So most often when working with ZBrush, what we do is we create a bounding box in a different software like Rhino or anywhere with the dimensions that we want in. Then we bring in that bounding box and use that as a frame of reference. And so whatever we design, we try to keep within that bounding box. So that's one trick to play and have some level of control. And over time, with some understanding of proportions and understanding of the toolkit, you can achieve a good level of control in the outcomes.
Got it.
Yeah.
And does it have like a physics interaction?
Oh, yes. The recent ZBrush 2021 has an inbuilt cloth simulation toolkit. So what it does is immediately with a click of a button, you can simulate cloths, fabrics, and create those as impressions on top of objects, or you can drop some object and make it a fabric, and then it collapses and it gets its own shape. So within seconds, you can simulate these things. And it has a very powerful Boolean engine as well, which lets you do live Booleans real time and develop so many interesting results. Because Boolean computation is something that takes a long time in other softwares as well. Yeah.
That's awesome.
So I think one of the most fascinating things being in this sphere is we kind of understand the potentials and strengths and weaknesses of different tools, seeing us use it and seeing also the participants use it and also my colleagues use it. So every time we just notice someone working on the tool, and we kind of dabble with the strengths and weaknesses, and we switch between different packages and understand what's best for what and what can be ignored for what.
Yeah, that's great. Like, if the one of the reason like I thought you are the best person to do this, because you have such a big spectrum of all the tools out there. So like, you know, the strength and weaknesses, and like I couldn't find on a Google blog what are some software for which reason I should use. So
Right. I'm happy to share. Even I'm not an expert at a lot of things, but then I'm just understanding through seeing different people's work as a part of the platform. And recently, what I have here now is Blender. Most of you might have heard of Blender and have seen Blender, because that's an open source software. And what we have here is work by Erindale. Erindale is our new instructor, who is an expert at something called Swerchok. Swerchok in Russian means cricket, the animal cricket. And the Swerchok is a plugin which is synonymous to Grasshopper. So it's pretty much Grasshopper, but inside of Blender. And then you can create some incredible generative workflows or procedural workflows within Blender using this plugin. And this is a really niche plugin, which has been in development for over 7 to 8 years. And it is more well developed than the geometry nodes that's coming up like an inbuilt tool within Blender. So geometry nodes, if it's year one, Swerchok has been there for 8 years. So this is why Erin, for instance, is a strong advocate of Swerchok. And he has shown us some incredible results and outcomes on using this plugin. And one of the most beautiful things that I find in Blender is it's like a Swiss Army knife. You have all sorts of things that you could do in all the tools that I've shown so far. Like if you want to work with polygonal modeling, subdivision modeling, or you want to render, you want to sculpt a geometry, or you want to work with node-based approaches, or you want to create simulations, all of it is in one place through Blender. So it's not a tool which is specialized for something, but it's like a jack of all trades. And the best part is it's open source, and you can pretty much harness this for most of your applications. If someone were to pick a tool today, I would definitely encourage them to pick something like Blender, because that has immense potential for the future.
yeah, and also like I was seeing like open source community in architecture is like highly advocating for Blender, and they're like developing plugins.
Yes. There's another popular plugin called Tissue by Alejandro Zomparelli, which is also, he's an architect as well, and it's a widely popular and extensively used plugin for Blender.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And here we have Unreal Engine, and this is one of my personal favorite game engines. And this is from the VR editor of a project that we worked on before we kickstarted Futurely. And so we had a team, like a consortium called FluxReal, and we were developing this project. And this was supposed to be the first Indian, so to say, sci-fi virtual experience. And this was one of my key projects that we were working on back in the day. And then we were, again, a cross-functional team, and we were placed in different parts of the world. And we used to interact and collaborate in VR. And this was like early or late 2018. And this is something which exposed us to a lot of interesting workflows. Like it's a huge discovery in the process, and understanding the VR space and understanding how to work with game engines. I think this is something I will be touching upon extensively in the next couple of slides. So this is just a glimpse of the interface. And what we are seeing here is a completely full-fledged done environment and we are compositing the scene in VR. So we are taking different elements, moving them from different parts. And then you see some of the moving lights, you see some of the animations on top. All those are basically some of the particle systems, some of the lighting systems that we had a connection between Unreal and Houdini. So some of these systems were generated in Houdini, and then we directly brought into Unreal, and then we created this impact.
That's awesome. Like I'm very curious, like how was your ideation stage look like? How were you brainstorming for this space?
Okay. So I think we took a lot of inspiration from this Ubisoft's game called Beyond Good and Evil 2, which is about to release and not yet come out. And we also took some of the inspiration from a comic called Ramayan 3392 AD, if I'm not wrong. So those were two areas which showed a highly futuristic scenario of India, for example. And that was really fascinating and captivating. And one other important thing was my wife and my colleague, when I was studying here at SAC, Madhu had a project which was completely focused on Indian futurism. So all those things, elements combined, and we had some attributes in hand, like a visual language was established, and we knew the kind of direction that we wanted to go. So some of these also comes with the idea of pixelation and using voxels as some of the volumetric elements to define the world. So as you can see, there are mostly the world is populated with a lot of voxels, but then it is superimposed with a lot of traditional Indian patterns and different lighting elements, various sources. And some of the spaceships and the other details were from games and cinema like Blade Runner. So there were multiple inspirations. So we did so many iterations of compositing voxels, and eventually we landed at this kind of an aggregation. And unfortunately, we did not complete the project because it was highly resource intensive back in the day, and we were doing this all on laptops.
Oh no.
Yeah. These were some other environments we produced in the process. So there was like a day version and then a night version of the same. So I'm just quickly like showing a run through the project. And we tried to simulate some familiar elements through using some of the posters, some of the visual pop cultural elements that were popular in the 80s and 90s, and we kind of garnished them all around the project as well. And this was kind of the first cut of how the whole world came together.
Looks great.
Thank you. So in a way, this project was really fascinating for me personally, because it opened up this whole canvas of world building, working with game engines, and working with different levels of meshes. Basically, that is something that most architects or AEC community is not used to, because we often, when we work with modeling tools, we create the most perfect geometry, and that is it. So we work with high level of precision, high level of detail, because the end goal is to build. But then what I really learned is that, just a moment, please. I'm going to, yeah, I think this slide got misplaced. So I want to touch upon this before we move forward. What happens is when we work usually with traditional architectural software, we work with a high level of detail and we ensure that we preserve all the level of detail. But then when you're working with something real time, you need to be a master at optimizing geometries. And you have something called LODs. LODs is basically LOD's level of detail. And LOD modeling is a technique. So this is something that's used in geospatial representations, or if you see something like Google Maps or OpenStreetMaps and all the 3D map software that you see. And what they do is when you see all that level of detail it's running on your web, on your browser, it is based on a technique. And this is what happens. And this is a small snippet I got from Aerometrics. It's a geospatial tech company. So if you notice, at a level of detail 0, they had complete 2D flat planes. And LOD 1, they have extrusions of the project. And then when you add LOD 2, they add a bit of three-dimensionality to it by introducing the roof inclinations and other attributes to it. Similarly, in LOD 3, they bring in an attribute of texture into the process. So that's how they bring in different layers. And what you do is, based on the distance you are from the object, different models get loaded. So if I'm farther, the LOD 0 gets loaded. And if I'm closer, LOD 4 gets loaded. So that's how you play and you trick the system. And that's how you optimize your scenes for real time. So this is a very interesting thing, an important thing to learn, which is fundamentally different from how we model for conventional architectural applications.
I think that's a great point, because the user experience for these heavy models matters a lot. The friction of time when it takes to load those heavy models. So how you can optimize, like especially on urban planning level, many times if the models are heavy, you just hate like doing changes because it takes a lot of time to load.
Totally true. Absolutely. And I think removing that friction is definitely the essence of real time. You don't want a jerky scene and wait for it to load for hours together.
Mm-hmm.
Even the efficiency of an architect and its time.
Yeah.
So like, before we move on, I just wanted to break down like the VR project you did. So
yeah,
if like from my understanding, you start with an inspiration and idea about what kind of scene you have. You start with like building blocks of little different assets you could integrate into the scene.
mm-hmm.
You manipulate the assembly and play around with the composition. Then you start adding like lighting elements in the scene, or like projection of interactions, and then you render it into the VR space using Unreal.
Yeah, it's kind of that. You're almost correct. I think what I will do is I will also break down the detailed sequence. I have a slide specifically for that, where we will discuss the in-depth of how it goes. Yeah.
Perfect.
Awesome. And this is another software package that we recently were dabbling with, especially since last year. This was like our baby for Futurely, because this, when we started Futurely and we conducted our first massive workshop studio online called Virtual Entities, that's when we really wanted to tap into the world of social VR. And there's this really interesting, sophisticated platform called Sanzar. And what is nice about social VR is the fact that you can meet and interact with multiple people real time, which is also, again, different from the other applications that you've seen so far, because most architects, the packages that we work with, you're only working as one solo person. And most often, your virtual creations are not experienced by other people. Only you get to see it. But in Sanzar, this enables you to have 25 to 50 concurrent users. Or if you have more users, it creates multiple instances of your world and then lets them use real time. So which makes it really convenient to host social events, parties, and other presentations as well. So we have juries that happen finally in Sanzar, instead of having the traditional window-based, Zoom-based jury. And this is a bit of the interface that I'm showing here. Yeah. So what you have here is a stripped down version of a game engine. Like if you take Unreal Unity as the hardcore game engines, Sansar is like a boiled down, simplified version with the core essentials of Unreal and Unity. And then you can build worlds using the tools that they provide. And you might think that the tools they provide are really basic or rudimentary, but then there's a lot of sophistication that you can achieve, because this is basically a platform which was meant for hosting music events. So the kind of play, the kind of room you have for working with materials, working with lighting, and working with interactions is phenomenal. And that's what makes it really exciting for us. As you can see the live recording of the Sansar screen here as well. So it takes you through a lot of room to play. And we can have interactive materials. We can have materials that are animated. We can have movements as a part of your animations. You can trigger different interactions with different parts of the model. You can custom have switches. You can have teleportation points. So you basically have all the toolkit through which you can curate an experience. So it doesn't simply become a regular project, but then it's an experience that you want to curate. So the best exciting part that most of us got to learn is, the way you want to start the experience, the way you want to take your user and explore your space is something you can design, which is something we don't necessarily venture into, because we just have an entrance point in a plan, and then we just assume that the other places follow, and there are corridors and things like that. So what is interesting here is, since it's spatial, you want to design every little nook and corner of the corridor, every little nook and corner of your entrance space, and things like that. So that adds a lot of freedom and a lot new degree of control, which was not possible before in the traditional built forms.
I must admit, like I was in that workshop, and we saw all the students jumping into that Sansar space, and everyone was like trying different dance moves, or how do you do this, and like interact. And I thought that was like a special moment where this is a totally new type of social virtual space interaction, which we haven't like uh, explored much into the design, like architectural workflow.
Indeed, yes. And it was a whole new space even for us as well, because most schools right now, they are dealing with the traditional VR, basically using VR as a tool for modeling, or VR as a tool for individual exploration. But this whole social exploration opens up new questions and new kind of challenges as well. One of the things from a scripting point of view is, let's say you have some triggers and you have some points. When you interact, something moves, something opens. How does it work when there are multiple people? Whose trigger should it take into consideration? Whose control, who gets to do the first trigger? Who gets to do the subsequent triggers? Should it turn off when subsequent people come in? And things like that. Those are the nuances we also were confronted with while working through the platform. Yeah.
Like I think there's a whole another need of like people who are into interactive spatial engineering. Like whenever you are interacting with these assets, like how do you engineer that experience? And like there are several possibilities. And I'm just like thinking from UI UX of like website or apps we have, where even if for loading, the type of
Yeah.
CSS animation you have and the interactivity creates a engaging moment for the end users. So like those instances like can create a whole different experience.
Absolutely agreed. And creating or working with a spatial paradigm is a whole different ball game, and it's still yet to be discovered, I think, because we are still in the very initial phases of working with spatial interfaces and spatial UI. And to be optimistic, I still think the game space, the game industry has been at the forefront of cracking the UI part, because in games you really do complex actions, and their goal is always to simplify it and make it convenient for even the most dumbest user to follow. And that's where I think they ace it the most. And when you have UIs that are so accessible for a global audience and not just professionals, there's so much you can take and adapt to our own projects as well.
That's so true. Like even the storytelling aspect they have, like in architectural walkthrough, like I don't see that often, like the gamified version of building walkthrough where people really want to be into that space and like feel that as an adventure.
Yes, yes. Most often what we end up doing is we just put our 3D models in VR and then we expect people to walk around. You might be fascinated for a few minutes, but then how do you create that intrigue when nobody asks you to visit something? I think that's a challenge. Like you need those elements of surprise, you need those elements of intrigue, which you cannot access otherwise. How do you, without uttering a word, grip the user is a challenge, which we still need to learn and understand.
For sure.
Yeah.
Also, I have a question. Like, for example, when you were saying it is used for events. So when we go in person, meet someone, so it is like in those 100 people, we go to certain person and we can hear that person talking as if that person is so close to us. So this Sansar social, does it do that? Like,
Yeah,
like
all the
go,
audio is spatial. Yes.
okay, that is pretty cool then.
So whatever you're talking will only be heard by your peer and not someone who's at a distant point. So it's more sophisticated than Zoom in that way, because you can have multiple cross conversations at the same time, unlike in Zoom.
Yeah, it is
Yeah.
fascinating.
But
Yes.
also the cool fact is, like if let's say there are groups of people in that space, if you're walking by through the group, you could hear some noise, like what they're
Yes.
talking.
Yes.
Gossips.
Yeah, it's pretty much like walking through a street and hearing the gossips around. Okay. And so I have a short trailer of the work that we produced during the Digital Futures this year. And this was in collaboration with Neverlab, an architectural studio it's based in Barcelona. So oftentimes we collaborate with different professionals as well to bring in their own expertise or their own visual language, and then we work with our own skill sets. So it's always this sort of a magic that comes through collaborations, and each time there's a new aesthetic, a new language that emerges. And so, for instance, these kind of really complex interactions were something that we explored here for the first time. So we had produced projects that range from like the standstill monuments to interactive towers and interactive pavilions, which have a whole range of things to do. I can also probably drop a link later on, which you guys can simply click and fire up and explore as well to this world.
I'm
Mayur,
just thinking.
yeah, go on. Yes.
I'm just thinking out, like it could be very interesting way of education if we have like a spatial where, okay, level 1 floor, you create, like you complete a grasshopper base 1 tutorial, then go to level 2 and do something like that.
Absolutely. Oh wait, I have something like that to show you, and this is something which I've never talked about before, and I always wanted to share. There's an amazing package to do that in PlayStation. Yeah. Right, I'll move on. Okay, to come back to the question that Mayur asked earlier. So how do you work with when you're developing for these virtual worlds? Although I've titled it as social VR workflow, it's not necessarily for social VR. It can be for any sort of VR applications. So this is something which, if you are an architect or an engineer or anyone from the AEC industry, can get a grasp on. So 3D modeling, although I have mentioned the non-conventional software here, you can use the conventional software as well, like Rhino, Revit, or Grasshopper. So what we usually do is there are multiple steps here. There are like 5 steps which I've showcased, and they can work interchangeably as well. It's not like a concrete sequence that you need to follow, but then some steps can be interchanged. So to just begin with, we have the 3D modeling phase, which is the fundamental phase, which all of us are aware of. And to quote some of the non-conventional software that can also be used alongside the software that we know is Zbrush, Houdini, Maya, Blender, Gravity Sketch, and Modo. Gravity Sketch is something that I will show you shortly. It's a VR package. And Modo is a highly underrated 3D modeling software. And it's by an organization called Foundry. Foundry produces Nuke, which is another VFX package extensively used in cinema. And they have their own series of tools, and Modo is one of them. And there's also Mari. Mari is a texturing software. Anyways, so once we are done with the 3D modeling part, the second part is where most of us are challenged because we are not used to it, like optimization and UV mapping of meshes. And since all the geometries that you take to real-time space need lighter file sizes, you really need to know how you can preserve the detail and yet make it as less and as low poly as possible. That's always the challenge. And that's where it comes through some practice and experience. And then finally, unlike the traditional way of simply applying a material, you need to UV unwrap each of these objects and apply a map. So UV unwrapping is a process where you are actually computing all your mesh phases, and it computes the number of texture coordinates, and it shows like it unwraps it into a flat map. And that is essential for taking it into a real-time application. And now, once you're done with the optimization and UV mapping, you can either jump to a texturing platform or you can directly jump to a compositing platform. In the Sansar's case, like a social VR tool, you don't have to go through a texturing engine because Sansar provides its own material database and material tools, which you can directly use. But if you're working with something like Unity or Unreal, you can consider going into a texturing program like Quixel, Substance, or Mari. So for instance, Quixel is recently purchased by Unreal Engine, and they have a direct bridge. And similarly, Substance also has a bridge with Unreal. So what these guys do, what do these guys do? Why do we have to go to a texturing platform in between? Like, why can't we deal with it in Unreal or Unity? You of course can, but then there are some attributes that are specially provided by these programs. So for example, in Substance or Quixel, they have something called procedural materials, and you have something called LOD-based materials. So when you're working again with a different LOD meshes, you want to have different LOD textures as well. So you want to have low poly rudimentary textures, then you have 1080p textures, you have 2K textures and 4K textures and so on. So based on the different levels of detail, you want to load them. And it's not just that. This whole domain of procedural texturing is also similar to how we develop procedural workflows in AEC. So procedural texturing, I'm going to show a short trailer shortly after this, where you'll understand that if you want to apply a material to an object, traditionally in any software, you just take a texture map and you apply it. But if it's a procedural texture, you can create so many imperfections. You can create weathering effects if it's a brick, and you can create different layouts of brick, for example. And all of that is coded as a part of the material, and you can just change them through sliders, and which makes it fascinating. And it also makes your result more interesting and more personalized rather than this picture perfect virtual aesthetic that you get when you apply a uniform texture map. And that is why you use programs like Quixel or Substance. And then finally, you bring them to Unreal Engine, Unity, whichever you prefer. And you start compositing the scene. So these are like the elements or the alphabets. And then finally, you build your product or the world in the game engine. And if you notice, I've also mentioned a couple of others called Core, Roblox, and Godot. Core is another similar engine to Sansar. It's not being talked about in the AEC space at all. But on the other hand, Core lets you build video games through their own custom inbuilt engine. So Core runs on Unreal Engine, and it has, again, a series of tools that you can use, and you can build your own experiences using Core. And the way they market or promote their software is you can also build experiences and even monetize them using their own platform. So for example, if you know this artist Deadmau5, or they call him, so he is building his own world using Core right now. And he's planning to host a plethora of events, concerts in there. And so if you can imagine him hosting his own events, you can see the potential of how many things you can do within using Core. And similarly, Roblox is a video game, online based, which is catching a lot of traction worldwide. Again, it comes with a sandbox set of tools. I mentioned this word called Sandbox. Sandbox is like this sort of a clay space, creative clay space that the computer gives you, the software gives you a set of tools with which you can build your own custom versions. And most often those custom versions of the experiences that you create are so extensive because the tools are also comprehensive. And I personally believe that sandboxes are kind of the future, and they're going to make all these complex software a lot more accessible through simplification and through like stripping it down, making it more bare bone, and making it essential only, as opposed to just giving you millions of options to choose from. And that's where I think we are heading to a fascinating time. And finally, once you have the world getting built, you need to code interactions, because you don't want a virtual space which is just dead and static, because I think you can rather show a visual or a render rather than having a virtual static space. You want to have some elements of interactions. Like if it's an architectural project, it can be as simple as having some opening and closing doors. You can have lighting systems that can turn on and off. And in our case, since we try to be a lot more experimental, we work with moving platforms. We work with teleportation systems that lets you move between different stages of the project. And we also dial up and dial down the gravity to explore the kind of accessibility that you get. Because essentially we are dealing with a character that's in a constraint, in a virtual space with certain levels of constraint. And what can that character potentially do is what you want to explore. You don't want to take a real life character and then just design for them. It's not that. So that's why designing for the virtual is a different game as opposed to designing for the build space.
When you
This
talk
is
about
incredible.
procedural texturing, so
yes, I have a slide. Yeah, go on.
So does Lumen has the same thing, or it uses any of these three?
Lumion, I think it is safe to say that Lumion has a bit of that. But in procedural texturing, it can be expanded a little bit more as well. Like, for example, the peak of what I've seen is you can also create damage effects using procedural techniques, procedural texturing, because you can deform a geometry just with the textures by some interaction. Let's say like in video games, if you shoot a geometry, like if you shoot a wall, you want it to break, you want it to deform, or if it's a metal surface, you want it to get a dent. Those things also can be coded and embedded in procedural textures.
Okay, that comes in coding interactions part of.
No,
No?
in procedural, it's in the texturing itself. What you do with the
Okay.
interaction is, if I shoot this wall, I want it to load this texture or load this state of the model. So you basically bridge those two through the code.
I'm wondering, like, when you said like interaction and like, let's say damaging the texture using physics, like using interaction, is the texture creating an illusion of deformation, or is the mesh is also getting deformed and the physics is applied from texture to the
It's
mesh?
actually an illusion. Mostly we have the bump maps, normal maps, and displacement maps, right? So it is an exploitation of using the normal maps and creating an effect where you actually deform the surface. Yes. Yeah. And just like you mentioned earlier, Mayur, we have an amazing tool which lets us learn. Okay, this is before I dive into that, this is a short trailer of how procedural texturing works. And this is using Substance 3D. Again, it's a trailer from Polygon. Polygon is one of the leading texturing sites, and they are no way sponsoring this video, but then we are showing them here. So what they do is Substance Painter and Substance Designer. Those are two tools that are part of Substance Toolkit. And in Designer, you can design these procedural materials. And in Painter, you can actually paint the textures and get these kind of the 2D, what to say, wrap around the object. But in Designer, you actually code the procedural sides. Again, you have a visual scripting paradigm here. So like you see in the trailer, it's a huge script, which gives you so much level of variation in a simple brick wall. I'm going to just push forward. You can notice here. So for example, you're able to choose the different kinds of bond, different kinds of stacking methods, and you can have different levels of depth, detail. So you can also introduce edge chipping. You can create these kind of weathering effects. Just to give you an example of how this works, one of the simplest nodes that is used in a material like this is called LERP, LERP node. LERP node is linear interpolation. Linear interpolation between two textures. Let's say I have a texture of a brick wall, and I call it, it's in linear interpolation, you give it the value 0. And then there's another texture of a weathered brick wall, and I give it the value 1. In LERP, what you do is you try to find the middle ground. So it's like a superimposition of two textures on top of each other, and it tries to create a blend between them. So think of that as one LERP, and imagine so many LERPs and happening at the same time with so many different superimpositions. And that's how they build these procedural materials, giving a lot of control and without you going to load a new texture each and every time.
Is it like a Photoshop for layering all the texture?
Exactly. But you just build it on a script and then you hand it over to whoever is the designer.
And like, because it's procedural, like you could, the possibilities are endless. Like in a walkthrough, you could have like building weathering animation where you could slide. Yeah.
Totally. That could be pretty interesting as well, showing a building life cycle. Okay. So this was something that really fascinated me the most. And it's not talked anywhere in the AEC scene so far. And it's called Dreams. Dreams is a game for PlayStation 4, and it took 7 to 8 years of development. And what's really nice about Dreams is you have a game that lets you build video games. As if I have to simply put it, that's what Dreams does. And it has a series of levels in its campaign mode. And just like Mayur mentioned, so you have a level 1 where you learn how to work with a node-based script, let's say, and then you progress various levels and you understand different parts of world building that you can come up with. And finally, you can build your own experience and share with different users. And what's amazing is the level of sophistication it has. So you simply use a controller, or you have the PlayStation VR that you can use. And you have this really cute looking pointer, which is like a friend for you. And look at all the kind of tools that they've embedded. You have the snap tools, you have modeling tools, you have animation tools. Everything is a part of the platform. And this is great because it's like a single little software that gives you an extensive modeling paradigm, modeling, visualization, lighting, animation. It's like a paradigm for creating a complete experience. And for example, what we see here now is called a movement recorder. So what it does is you switch on the movement recorder and you move an object in space, and you move it with your own imperfections. And then you record that, and you kind of replay that action multiple times. And what you see here now is a music interface where you can have this sort of a complete timeline keyframe animation, and you can move different parts the way you want. And also the game comes with a lot of preset libraries, and look at the level of detail that you can change different attributes.
This is great. I'm already dreaming.
Yeah, nice. So in a way, like if you're someone with zero to no experience in game design, even you can really just strap on, get this game, and then get a hang of the different nuances. And for us architects and designers, it's way intriguing to get into it because we already understand space. We already understand how to work with three-dimensionality. And then when you have to work with these kind of elements as well, it just adds a whole new layer. So this is like an overview of how it looks. And now what I'm going to show you is their visual scripting language. This is the interface they have, and it lets you node code everything. You can create so many interactions, you can create so many triggers, and you can have custom node colors, and you can also nicely package a node, then open it when you want, close it when you want. And this is exactly what I mean by the UI readiness that games offer, which we are nowhere close to. And if a 12-year or 13-year-old kid can pick this up and get a hang of it, it's really fascinating.
This is game changer. Like the one thing I like about gaming is like this kind of UI. I don't need to type on YouTube like how to create generative designing that stuff. Like I could learn on the go.
Exactly. And yeah, so there's so much level of interaction, so much levels of stages of complexity. It's just embedded. And when you have these beautiful little icons and beautiful little interactive definitions, it just makes it fascinating to learn. And even in terms of the modeling and sculpting possibilities, it offers a lot of freedom. So it's literally one of those packages where you can just get started and you get a whole start to end experience of how game design, world building, and interactions work.
Basically ZBrush with some fun.
Yes. It's like a mix of ZBrush, Sansar, a bit of maybe Rhino as well.
Combo.
You mean Grasshopper? That
No,
language?
not, yeah. Yes.
Like I'm like I could imagine the possibilities you could do with this. Like we can see like one feature at a time, but like the complexity could be at another level once you start mixing these things.
Totally, totally.
But like practicality, can we like have this thing into a Rhino or somewhere where we can document it?
Yeah, so that's one of the limitations for now. They don't let you export it because the theme of the software is to create and share with other people. So they want it to be a free experience sharing platform. But what was very interesting is I knew that someone would ask this question, and I saw an interesting workflow today. It's by the same guy, Martin Nebelong. He's one of the game designers and artists who use this software extensively. So what he did is he created a complete world inside Dreams, and he simply used his controller to just move around the objects. And there is a software called Reality Capture. Reality Capture is a 3D scanning software. And he used a screen recording of his model inside Dreams and extracted the video information. And using that, he recreated the entire scene in Blender. And it was amazing. And he almost got like 80 to 90% of the level of accuracy that the original scene has, and which is fascinating.
That's a great hack.
Yeah, indeed. I was like, wow, I should use this sometime in some other projects and see if I can.
Alert, new workshop coming up.
For sure. So this is Dreams. And then we have Gravity Sketch. Gravity Sketch is one of the many VR modeling platforms. And what's interesting about Gravity Sketch versus the other platforms out there is it allows you to have NURBS modeling, subdivision-based modeling, and all the things that you do in Rhino. So Gravity Sketch is kind of synonymous to Rhino in VR. So which means you have all the levels of control, all the levels of precision that you achieve in a subdivision modeling tool. And this is, for example, by Timur Kiryashov. He is a designer who created an architectural project using Gravity Sketch. And it's really game-changing because most other VR toolkits, they just let you create an intuitive scribbling or sculpting kind of outcome, which is imprecise. It's more like ZBrush. But then within Gravity Sketch, he achieves a lot of control. So these are kind of the surfaces, the single surface geometries, the NURB geometries that you see in Rhino. And there's so much level of control when you see it right in front of you, and you can scale it in different dimensions. Now, let me just fast forward a bit towards the final. And you can notice that it really takes a great shape. And he's even able to build a sort of a seemingly final scene for this with a lot of foliage around.
Like, Vamsi, I have a question for you on this. So if I'm not wrong, Gravity Sketch like is been out there for a bit of time, but and it's a great like sell. Like we do sketching in 3D. Okay, game changing, but still I haven't seen much adoption of this tool. Like what are like the things which are stopping like large scale adoption for this?
I think one of the, you mean when you mean adoption in AEC, right? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
I simply think it's a lack of awareness because we often want, most people in AEC want tools that speak or that resonate with architectural or the terminology that we use. Like, for example, there are other platforms like Arc.io. Arc.io is a platform that's getting popular in the recent times. And I think there's also Mindesk VR and a couple of others. while they are more tailored to architectural applications, these guys wanted to be a little more broader. They were more focused towards industrial designers, product designers, and so on. But the thing is, yeah, so that's why most people tend to ignore. When you see Gravity Sketch, you think it's just a program for some other purpose. But essentially, it could be used way more like better for architectural applications. Like you see here, it's pretty much Rhino that you're doing, but in VR. And working with these levels of subdivisions is something that I have not noticed in other VR software as well. And so that is another layer of control and precision that comes up. And I think I personally see this also as one of the agenda of this talk, because we are trying to uncover and discover these kind of new programs which can be brought in.
Yeah, the possibilities are endless. Like we discovered it.
Absolutely. Yes, I think that's primarily the kind of material that I wanted to show you guys today. We can discuss more from these, whatever we've seen so far, and we can also take it in a different direction if you want, I'm open.
For sure. Like,
yes.
I think this was a great presentation, Vamsi. Like the tools you showed, the application interface, and the possibilities. We got a good understanding of how we can use at what stages and what are some of the features. So definitely helps us to think about these tools in the different stages of design. So I wanted to know your thoughts. Like I saw some of your stories on metaverse, and so what is your speculation about like coming 5 years down the line, the architect's role in these metaverses?
Okay. So firstly, I think I've always been a highly ambitious believer of the metaverse. So even before the pandemic happened, even before people like traditionally, it became like a household conversation now talking about this term metaverse on your online social feeds. I always thought ever since my exposure to virtual spaces in 2016 and 17 that this is going to become an essential space in the AEC sphere. And I simply think that we really need to evolve, and we need to include this as a part of our architectural learning and education, because this is a space, if we don't tap into, we will be neglected and we will be long gone before it takes over by storm. Like, for example, now Facebook is hiring 10,000 people in Europe to build the metaverse that they want. Now everyone's building their own version of the metaverse, and we don't want to be neglected, and we need to be a lot more aware, because we by education are way more well informed in understanding spaces, and that's what we do all through our lives. And we can really bring in a lot of value to the table if we start dabbling with it as soon as possible.
Yeah, for sure. And like, especially when like this metaverse gets into the blockchain, it's a whole another world.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm really like optimistic, and I actually look forward to NFTs going more spatial as well, rather than just series of flat images. And it makes a lot more sense to go more spatial, more immersive and interactive through blockchain.
Yeah, like, so initial, like from my observation, we had like static NFT from art blocks. They allowed like generative NFT, and you could play with some of the parameters. And in Decentraland, now they're opening where I could buy a pixel of land on that metaverse and create like assets and some interaction. But now I need to code to define those interactions. So it's not that like no code level yet, but
Mhm.
it's another space for exploration.
Definitely. I think I strongly believe in platforms like Decentraland and the other counterparts as well. At the same time, I'm also more optimistic on games being an amazing space for NFTs because, in terms of concurrent users around the world, multiplayer video games have the highest number of users at the same time, and there is a necessity for social currency and showcasing your social credibility through having exclusive assets or unique tailor-made attributes which you can use within a video game. So I really think the emerging winner, would be the player with the users. Like wherever there are a lot larger social clusters, that's where those platforms will have the maximum value of um, buying and selling, the commerce of it, and also the value for having an NFT on that specific platform.
Yeah, like this like provokes me. Like, so we have creator economy, like for like all the social media influencers. We have like game-based economy where like I have seen people on Twitch giving like donating coins and stuff. So I haven't seen like architecture like dabbling around like when we are creating spaces. Okay, if you like this spatial experience, this theater experience, give it a donation token or like something. I'm just like saying it out loud, but there is like a possible medium.
It is so true. It also comes from this inherent bias, I think, that a lot of architects still shy away from marketing themselves and promoting themselves, and they really look at these like some sort of a taboo. They try to stay away from it when it involves anything financial, anything transactional. And so that's why most often they would rather work hard and do something and not get paid for it, rather than uh, kind of capitalize on what you create.
That's so true. And like I have to bring this idea which I was thinking before the interview. So in the workshop, like all the students create this assets, let's say in terms of Blender, Maya, or like virtual spatial experiences. So when I was talking to Republic Realm, so it's a virtual real estate. They
Mhm.
hired architect to create a shopping mall on Decentraland, and then they do advertisement. So there is a need of this kind of buildings on this metaverses. So is there a way we could maybe create a platform to host all these assets collectively created, and maybe based on the usage you could reward those students?
I think there is a possibility. Like when you say reward those people, you mean like architects getting to uh, present their work on a platform and they get some sort of a monetary incentive for placing their work or showcasing the work, or
Yeah, I was thinking on the line, like let's say all these assets we create like a website that okay, where this metaverse folks, if they are interested in a 3D digital asset or a special experience, they could mint it, all these assets created, and the whole community gets rewarded or something.
yes, I think there's a definite possibility for that, and maybe it's a matter of initiative not being taken, to be honest. Because if I look at my archives or repositories from my own work and the participants' work, we'll have thousands of models that are just being wasted after a workshop is over. Yeah, there's so many incredible projects, and they're just static on the hard drives, doing nothing.
Yeah, like it's it's laying down at someone's hard drive, but if it get it out on the world wide web,
Yeah.
anyone maybe like it's not useful now, but 10 years later there's another metaverse where people are interested in specific model, and your model gets back a new life. And
Yeah. I think that slowly starts happening if we start showing up more in the NFT game to slowly start showing our work in the social media or different platforms. It's a matter of exhibiting your own personal work. And if we start doing that more and more, it's a kind of a marketing of yourself and your work. And that's when the other people from different domains who really value it will come forward and can make use of your assets and models that you build. Yeah,
For sure. And like, to be honest, like I feel there is a bit of gap, as you said earlier, because of lack of marketing, where let's say there is a metaverse person or real estate or an investor, they might hire like a 3D game artist or like a fictional artist to create a building. They don't have currently like a medium to find like who are the architects who are interested in this and Google it and hire them. Like,
yes, that is very true because like if someone's building for the virtual, they would probably look at platforms like ArtStation or Behance or the other art-based platforms because that's where the virtual work is curated. And most architects or AEC people don't use those platforms. And we tend to use other places where we try to market our work only from the built perspective and not from a virtual perspective. I've never seen any architect for hire who says that I can build for your virtual real estate. Nobody even talks about it.
you know,
Yeah.
it's time to take the initiative now.
Yes.
Yeah, even like I had this thing like our portfolio are also very 2D, and it doesn't take much effort to like, obviously if you know coding, but to host your portfolio and maybe like make a 3D GIF or like some video of all and allowing some interaction on your website itself. I think that can open up like, oh, this architects have a different level of 3D modeling, and there might be some investor who are looking for like how to interact and open door and like use a bathroom in that game experience, not like just a mesh box. So
Agreed. Totally agreed. Yeah, I think it's also a matter of the firms that are being interested in it. Like for most people, they make portfolios to apply to firms. Unlike an artist who actually makes a portfolio to showcase to the world out there and get hired, we are not used to that mindset. We make portfolios to get placed in a practice. So oftentimes we tailor to the needs of the firm, and the firm needs 2D drawings or technical imagery. And so we neglect the other side of how we can showcase or portray our projects. Like I can blame this a little bit even on how we submit our portfolios. We are asked to submit a 3 MB or a 5 MB file, and there's no way you can showcase a lot of things in that. And nobody wants to click on URLs and see an issue portfolio. Like people want PDF files as a download.
yeah,
It's crazy.
we just need a Sansar space to host all of our 3D models and a portfolio walkthrough.
Yeah.
When is Futurely coming on Sansar?
Well, we are always there.
Is it like you host your workshop there?
All our workshops have an after party there, or the final project presentations happen in Sanzar.
That is good.
And in fact, the next weekend, we have something coming up in Sanzar as well. That will be disclosed in the next couple of days. So we are celebrating our 10K,
10K, yeah.
milestone on Futurely. Yeah.
Congrats
Thank
on
you.
that.
Thank you. So we are hosting a series of workshops and talks. And as a part of that, we are also planning to host something in Sansa towards the end of it.
Yeah, I saw before the interview, like the first speaker was announced. So that's awesome. Cool. So now I would like to cover like the section for advice to people who want to learn this. And one thing I find that a lot of when you start dabbling into this area, there are so many tools to explore, and you start learning Houdini, and then you see, oh, in ZBrush I could do this. Like, how do you manage your time, and how do you like find your focus or tool which you resonate the most?
To be honest, this is something you can only understand when you try out the software. You can never just look at it and be able to make conclusions. And I personally think that's where we, through Futurely, also try to help, because you don't want to dabble, or you don't want to get stuck in this endless loop of hunting YouTube videos and see if this works or this fits my bill or not. We're trying to create workshops, like mini tailored workshops in that space, where you can explore, like make or break within 4 hours or 8 hours, and understand the threshold, the potential of it, and then decide for yourself whether you can go with it or just not go with it. And I think even from our conversation today, there will be a lot of revelation on what tools can be used for what purposes to an extent. And this is something we can keep discovering through the community, through other users as well, and simply by asking, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, that's for sure. And what are some like areas of improvement you see in our tools learning paradigm?
Um, I didn't understand your question correctly. When you say
Like,
improvement, like you are, yeah, please go on.
yeah, like I meant to say like currently either like one, download the software, watch some tutorials, attend a workshop, or like
Mhm.
there's different ways to learn a software. So what do you think like the areas of improvement or like most effective way to approach?
It's a bit harder question because I think it kind of varies from person to person. Uh, to me personally, I'm more of a self-explorer. I try to dabble around. I watch multiple videos of the same software, and I try to pick different nuggets from it. Like, let's say if I were to start a project, I can only talk about my experience. It doesn't have to be replicated, or it doesn't reflect on other ways, other people doing things. So what I would do is I'll try to understand, how do I do this? That's how my question appears. And I don't simply pick a software and try to learn from zero to hero. I don't do that. I just focus on the parts that I want to learn, or the questions that I have, and how do I fix it. And whatever tool that comes along the way, I just pick it, learn it, just those parts, and then keep moving forward. That's how I do things. Yeah.
When I talk to a lot of people, like senior people or someone of my age, even sometimes, so
Mhm.
they have this, how many software do we learn? Like, why do we learn? And every day a new software come, and then we have to go through from like zero to hero that you said. So
Yeah.
it's very hard, and also awareness is not there that much, that you don't know even how many software launching every day. So what is your answer to them?
Okay, I think you will understand over time the kind of work that you're doing. Like, let's say if you're in a professional practice, for most of the applications, BIM is really important and essential. In Revit, working with Dynamo, Rhino inside Revit, those are the kind of workflows that you want to learn, and just focus on that. Like, you don't want to simply dive into ZBrush or Unreal or something like that while you're focusing on that. So it doesn't make sense. And in my case, since I'm working on the opposite side of the spectrum, where I'm focusing on the virtual exploration more, that's why I dive more into these versus that. So I think, yeah, learning, having the awareness or building the awareness is more important. And then eventually you realize that you don't have to learn a lot of platforms. You can get things done with just a set of tools. You don't need like 10 tools to achieve a result. And now, if someone were to start, I would definitely encourage a lot to pick on Blender, because that's an open source platform. And this is also an important factor that comes in, which most people don't pay attention, is when you're studying, you get access to all the software packages in the world. But when you switch to a professional, you have to worry about licensing. You have to worry about so many other things. So staying in the open source lane is something that I would prefer, and I would want to advocate as well. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And like one thing I would like to share, like I'm guilty of this myself. Many times we see renderings on social media, we first question like, what tool did you use? Like, and instead of like, what's the creativity, what was the challenge, or like, what's the story? And it's also like some of the schools publicize their like social media with this cool looking things, and students are being influenced partly that, okay, they are doing so many cool things, what are the different softwares they are using, and try it out. And then students start learning those softwares. Sometimes it's a bit expensive to learn those softwares. Sometimes I see a lot of the softwares, once they start working, they might not use those software. So like I see some divide here where I don't know how to address this. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think there's a very clear divide between architecture, profession, and academia. And most of what you would do in an academic space is not something that you would use later in a professional space. That's 100% true. And I also think that's where this whole the metaverse or the virtual spaces is a sort of a new avenue where you can still use what you dabble with at school, the kind of creative explorations that you do, the crazy works that you do, even for your thesis. Most people in an architecture school do an incredible flamboyant thesis, and then eventually you come out to the profession, it's a completely different ball game. But you don't have to be restricted now, because you can actually make it a virtual experience for someone to explore your project. Similarly, I think that's unfortunately unavoidable, but then there's no hard and fast way to bridge that part, because they have always been like two parallel tracks that go on in the traditional education model. And maybe I can say this is where we are taking a little short, tiny steps to bring in that sort of a middle ground between the two through Futurely. And we also want to bring a lot of these things into the conversation. Like, you want to talk about NFTs, you want to talk about virtual spaces, you want to understand how you can also work on something buildable versus also talking about and dabbling with these kind of things at the same time. And then it's your path to decide whether which side you want to pursue.
Got it. I wish this conversation goes on and on. It was great. Like, I will end the interview with a rapid fire question. So you'll have 5 to 10 seconds to answer it.
Right.
All right. Are you ready?
I think so.
Okay, let's do this.
Get the timer.
Your favorite architect?
Wow. Frank Gehry.
Favorite game?
Horizon Zero Dawn.
One thing you hate the most in architecture?
There are many things, unfortunately. Yeah, I think the resistance to change.
A book that impacted you the most?
Okay. Again, there are many books. Let me just quickly think of something. Yeah, I think I would quote the recent book that I'm reading. It's called Thinking Fast and Slow. It opens up a lot of biases about human nature. Yeah.
Favorite city?
My hometown in Chennai, in India.
Favorite food in Chennai?
Okay. Wow. Yeah, I love Chinese that you get in Chennai, the traditional fast food centers in Chennai. Yeah, the local.
Oh man, I miss
Yes.
Indo-Chinese. Okay, yeah. I got it. So last question is, one thing you wish you would have done differently in your career?
Yeah, I think I would love to have embraced more coding and programming early on in my career, because that's something that I started my career with, and then I jumped into architecture, and then now I'm again trying to get back to.
Awesome. So lastly, is there anything which we didn't cover in this interview and you would like to end the interview on that note?
Nothing in particular, because we can keep going if we start diving deeper into each of these areas. But I really think that I would encourage everyone to be more expanded with their perspectives and try to look outside their boundaries of their school, the kind of curriculum. There's always an overarching thesis that an institution tries to follow. But then when you look outside each institution, there are so many different schools of thought that come into play. And it is important to know that there are different schools of thoughts. Once you're aware of it, it's your choice whether you want to pursue it or not. But then not being aware always limits your possibilities. And I want you all to open up to different possibilities.
Yeah, go wider and then deeper.
Yes, wider and then deeper. Yeah.
I have one question, like, as you also have faced in your career, so do you do you still agree doing masters to the people who have, their mindset clear that what they want to do and they're not finding the exact curriculum what they're trying to find out? So what do you advise?
I personally wouldn't. Like right now, again, these are some things that I discover over the fly. Because when I did my master's, for me, it was really valuable and essential because it opened up so many doors. But now there's this whole space of online learning that also enables a lot of things. And you don't have to spend 2 years, like lock in yourself and then realize whether it's your path or not. You can simply sign up for short-term courses or workshops and also explore whether you like something or not. And secondly, if you're really clear about your path, then you can, I think the most important factor is being self-driven and self-motivated. Because if you are inclinated towards learning, like being a lifelong learner is something that I genuinely believe in. You can always pick from different paths, different areas, and just learn.
Richa, is this your personal question or are you?
Let's do afterlife.
Okay.
You're currently doing your master's or?
No. So I am having a pressure of doing masters, but I'm like, no, I should not do. I'm not liking that path of doing masters. I can evolve. I can, it's so much to learn than why to do masters in some specific term and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's do it afterlife, please.
Okay.
Yes.
It was a fantastic conversation. Thanks a lot, Vamsi, to be on this show and sharing your work and thoughts.
Thanks a lot for having me, Mayur, and it was a pleasure being here. And nice to meet you too, Richa.
Thank you. Same here. And please come to Chennai ASAP and we're gonna meet.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Bye.